Social Security and interest on the debt.
There you go. And his purported concern about all this isn't the propriety of the debt, isn't the falsification of the indebtedness, isn't the fact that the Federal Reserve never gave up any lawful consideration in laundering all the principal that's ever created in this way into its possession, nor that it multiplied all this falsified indebtedness into terminal indebtedness. No, his concern is the mathematic impossibility of austerity. And he himself is telling you that we're not recovering. In so many 15, 20 years down the road, we're going to be paying everything toward things which are not enough to sustain us, and particularly an ever greater sum of interest on just the federal debt. This doesn't even count what is going to happen to private debt in the meanwhile.
There won't be any money left for the military or for any other services the government provides. And
in fact, what he's projecting here has already transpired, and that's the reason we're accumulating these monumental federal deficits.
We can only address those issues if we begin to think about them now.
Yes, people, but only if you think about them in the ways that you need to think about them now, so that you recognize solution in time. Mr. Ben Bernanke has admitted in every phase and aspect of this entire interview that he and all his colleagues, including this interviewer, are not thinking about the issues as they need to be considered, as will solve them.
Bernanke makes a point of remaining silent on specific proposals that Congress might consider, so we were surprised when he did offer up a big idea for making the economy grow.
Cleaning up the tax code, for example. The tax code is very inefficient, both the personal tax code and the corporate tax code. By closing loopholes and lowering rates, you could increase the efficiency of the tax code. And
further ambiguity and disinformation. What does he mean, increase the efficiency of the tax code? The tax code is largely paying for interest on the ever unjustifiable, artificially multiplied sum of falsified indebtedness to a purported central banking system which merely publishes the evidence of our promissory obligations to each other. It isn't even justified to pay this, and he's advocating to somehow make it more efficient, which is a preposterous idea anyway. What do you mean, reduce rates and increase in efficiency? I mean, my God, if that's a big idea, God help us, because we can't even be saved from ourselves.
Create more incentives for people to invest.
Tell me something. How can there possibly be more genuine incentives to invest if interest multiplies artificial indebtedness in proportion to the circulation and remaining capacity to pay, and future conditions, therefore, can only be worse than they are now?
Recently, Bernanke has been facing hostility from the most conservative members on Capitol Hill. Some are calling for reducing the Fed's role, but Bernanke understands that his job is not a popularity contest.
How concerned are you about the calls that you're beginning to hear on Capitol Hill that would curb the Fed's independence?
Well, the Fed's independence is critical. The central bank needs to be able to make policy without short-term political concerns in order to do what's best for the economy.
It is impossible for the Fed to ever do what is best for the economy, because the Fed itself is the worst possible thing for the economy. The Fed itself, its very obfuscation of the currency, is inherently terminal. Just a part of Bernanke's lie here, therefore, is that independence somehow allows the Fed to serve you better. The lie of this is, the incredible lie of this is, that in fact, it's only the deception that it serves us at all, which is the very thing by which it exists. It was imposed by deception. It was imposed by betrayal. It was imposed despite promising to prevent the things it can only cause. And so Bernanke is carrying on this tradition in the present lie. The Federal Reserve cannot do the best thing for us. If it did the best thing for us, it would be to step down and get out of the damn way.
We do all of our analysis, we do all of our policy decisions based on what we think the economy needs, not based on when the election is or what political conditions are.
What a crock. They base all of their decisions on what they want to take from the economy, not what is good for it. It is not an economy at all. It is a system of exploitation, and these men are all about exploitation and exploitation only. No way in the world do they make a decision which benefits you. Ever.
Like many economists, Bernanke believes that it was the Federal Reserve itself that was instrumental in causing the Great Depression.
Of course it was, and my 1968 thesis of inevitable failure proves this. However, the present Federal Reserve System deploys the same obfuscation of the currency which is responsible for that failure, and Bernanke cannot avoid failure, therefore, without rectifying the purposely obfuscated nature of the currency. So this idea that the Federal Reserve caused it is a pretentious admission of guilt, from which he implies that they learned from this and now can avoid the failure which the obfuscation of the currency can only cause.
With its tight-fisted monetary policies.
More ambiguous language, tight-fisted monetary policies. What he's referring to, and obviously probably doesn't even understand himself, is what Ron Paul is proposing, that we somehow arrest this further borrowing, and in Ron Paul's case by elevating interest rates. The Federal Reserve during the Great Depression, or the onset of the Great Depression, withheld restrained borrowing. So yes, we had deflation because just as exceeding our creditworthiness precipitates in deflation, the nature of the system is to multiply all this indebtedness into a point where we can't service further debt. On the one hand, the administrators of the system could say, oh, well, let's stop the borrowing. Stop the bleeding. It will all go away. Well, no, it won't. Because if you don't borrow further, you can't maintain a vital circulation. So in that case, you suffer deflation. On the other hand, if we allow further borrowing, what occurs is ultimately you generate this exceeding sum of terminal indebtedness, which dedicates the entire circulation to servicing debt. And so you have a like deflation, which precipitates when we can no longer afford to borrow further as is necessary to maintain a vital circulation, which is the present case.
So he did exactly the opposite.
Which, of course, is equally stupid, as I've just said, because, on the other hand, then we borrow further and get ourselves into further debt merely to maintain vital circulation and attempting to sustain an unsustainable system which can only precipitate terminal failure under a terminal sum of falsified indebtedness to purported creditors who are not even creditors, who merely publish evidence of our promissory obligations to each other.
In the panic of '08, the Fed put up $3.3 trillion. And just this past week, the Fed revealed who got that emergency help. It turns out there were 21,000 transactions to financial firms including Citigroup, Morgan Stanley, and Goldman Sachs, to major industrial companies including GE, and even to foreign banks, including the Bank of England.
None of which is surprising then, because what does this central banking system do but, quote-unquote, reinvest its unearned takings in the purported economy, in every instrument it can get its hands on to take from us further. So these are the reasons that all this money has gone the direction it has, because its sway and the favor of these great takers are such that they when they go to the government for a handout, they take precedence over the people. And we know this is a fact, of course, because if that weren't a fact, then the government would be listening with open ears and open arms to mathematically perfected economy, which we've taught for over 40 years, is the only solution, a solution which government runs from, because instead it serves the perpetrators.
Most all of the loans have been paid back.
This is a further lie. In fact, many of the loans have been given back because strictures were attached to the salaries of the chief perpetrators. So, the recipients of these quote loans weren't really willing to submit themselves to the to the regulation and oversight which was to be imposed upon them. Nonetheless, it's irrelevant if the loans have been repaid. What will save us is rectification of the obfuscation of the currency, and so this little tidbit is just thrown out to you as if somehow it implies that you're going to be okay. They've already been able to repay these loans, which, even if they did repay them, we know, since most of these entities don't even produce anything, that they've only repaid them from further unearned taking from us, and this should raise our suspicions. So this is just a further deception that you aren't about to unravel, because you're not going to do the math on all these things, and so you're not going to see that it really doesn't amount to anything positive in your benefit. But it's thrown out there as if it stacks up that maybe we can rescue this thing. And Bernanke himself has testified that for 15 or 20 years into the future, they can foresee this thing only getting worse. Further money dedicated only to further taxation, only dedicated to servicing interest on a wholly falsified sum of debt, perpetually multiplied by interest, which isn't justified, to a false creditor who denies every real creditor interest in the process of their obfuscation.
But it was a historic transfusion of cash in a global system that was bleeding to death.
Which was sucked dry, on the contrary, by a parasitic process which can only suck from the host ever more and ever more and ever more until the host inevitably expires.
We asked Bernanke what would have happened if the Fed hadn't acted.
What would unemployment be today?
Unemployment would be much, much higher. It might be something like it was in the Depression, 25%.
By legitimate estimations, of course, it's far closer to 25% than it is to the purported 10 Bernanke in this interviewer cite. Nonetheless, whether the Fed helped or not is implausible that it did help, because, in fact, it's the cause of this unemployment. What is going on here is they're simply pouring money into circulation to compensate for the massive deflation which is occurring in our servicing of this massive sum of falsified indebtedness, the entire purpose of which is to exploit us. So this is the very means of exploitation which Bernanke intends to preserve. This is why that means of exploitation is not discussed. This is why that means of exploitation has not been justified. The fact of the matter is, they intend to perpetrate the crime against us, to perpetuate it, to go on, deeper and deeper and deeper into failure. And only we who understand this process, therefore, can solve it.
We saw what happened when one or two large financial firms came close to failure or to failure. Imagine if 10 or 12 or 15 firms had failed, which is where we almost were.
No, which is where we already are. Imagine, quote unquote, if you will, the federal government being theoretically insolvent. the people being theoretically insolvent because they can't afford to service the additional debt, which is